All good things have a sequel, so here's the Curriculum and Assessment Review, Part 2.
Hello everyone, it's CraigNDave at the Chalkface here, and this is part 2 in our trilogy, reviewing the outcomes of the Curriculum and Assessment Review and the government formal response. So, as I just mentioned, this is part 2, so if you've missed our first episode, we won't go over that again now. That really looks at the curriculum design, intent and assessment reform. We're going to dive in more specifically today at looking at the implications for our subject of computing. Overall, this series of videos is intended to summarize for you this 250 plus or 150 plus page report and the 61 page government response, so that you don't have to go to the effort of reading it all, highlighting the changes that will affect computing and helping you come up with what you need to do in order to prepare for this. So let's dive into part 2 then. Computing curriculum reform. Here's where we get juicy. So, Dave, I will let you start. Some interesting stats came out of the car here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to set you some homework first, which is to find out exactly how many pages are in this Curriculum and Assessment Review.
It's 281. There's reference. There's a lot, Dave. All right, there's a lot.
Like I say, hand your homework in next week. Right. Anyway, the curriculum reform. Yeah. So, few observations here. Teaching time has declined at Key Stage 3 from 4% to 3%, and at Key Stage 4, 5% to 2%. What do those percentages mean, Craig? Do you know?
Yeah, they were talking about the actual amount of hours of lesson time given to the subject. They acknowledged that when the computing came in sort of 2012, 13, that there was a rapid uptake in number of people taking it, although that then stagnated, and they highlight the girls and boys split has never really got very much better despite all the initiatives. But the bigger concern that they pointed out was the amount of curriculum time that it's being squeezed at Key Stage 3. And that some schools really are only offering as a carousel. And at Key Stage 5, despite it being an equivalent GCSE of everything else, the amount of time given to teach the subject is being squeezed. So that was the takeaway from that bit. For me, the interesting bit, though, is this third bullet point. I know you're going to get into this and have something to share. Key Stage 4 computing often taught only to computer science students. And here's the really scary bit. Only 10% of schools surveyed said that computing as a national curriculum subject was taught to all Key Stage 4 students. And this underpins something that has been a problem with the existing programme of study for a long word. And it comes down to a single word, doesn't it, Dave? So I'm going to remove this from the screen and bring up the current programme of study, because they've really nailed this. They've not shied away from it. Okay, there it is.
Yeah, so this is the current national curriculum programme of study at Key Stage 4 computing, and it says all pupils must have the opportunity to study aspects of information technology and computer science. And so what most schools have done is interpreted that as, oh, well, if we're giving students the opportunity to do a GCSE in computer science, then we are fulfilling what is required in the programme of study. That was never the intention. The intention was that all students, regardless of whether they choose GCSE, computer science, or iMedia, or whatever else qualifications the schools are offering, that even if they don't choose any of those subjects, they still have an opportunity, whether that's through a carousel, whether it's through cross-curricular, whether it's through a dedicated lesson on their timetable, however the school want to do it, that's fine. But students should be studying computing all the way to the end of age 16. And most schools simply aren't because the way
it's a foundation. Yeah, because it's a foundation subject. They were saying it needs to be taught to the end of Key Stage 4 alongside the other important foundation subjects. PE and RS and citizenship. These need to be taught, and that was really So they didn't shy away from that at all. Yeah, they didn't shy away from that at all. And they go on to say there, that first bullet point, well, it doesn't help that the program of study at Key Stage 4 is so vague. For a foundation subject, just 3 bullet points. It was briefly up on the screen. So they have said they're going to increase that. So, yeah, a couple of recommendations came out. Update the curriculum for clarity, consistency, and progression. Bump up that Key Stage 4 offering of computing and ensure students have access to computing until the end of Key Stage 4. So, yeah, that's
raises an
go on.
interesting dilemma, doesn't it? Because if all students have to study it, and they're going to sort of double down on that requirement so it's not misinterpreted in the programme of study, then you might as well make GCSE computing compulsory.
But they're
now,
not.
Of course, they're not going to do that, because if you're studying a GCSE subject, then, you know, you have probably 5 lessons a fortnight on your timetable or something like that. So they're not going to do that, because that will take one of the options away from the students. But how are they going to ensure that? Because we've seen, as Craig's already said, we've already seen at Key Stage 3, it's been really problematic for schools to get any time. And, you know, they've kind of taken a lesson off humanities or a lesson off music, or however they've done it, in order to create a single lesson for Key Stage 3 computing. And we know some schools have a little bit more than that, and that's great. But many schools don't even have that these days. And how are you going to therefore ensure that the computing element is covered right across Key Stage 4 in years 10 and 11? It's going to be really interesting to see how that happens. I mean, I personally don't think it will happen, because I think unless it becomes one of the criteria that Ofsted look for, not specifically computing, but that the programme of study is being followed by the school in its entirety, unless that becomes part of the criteria for Ofsted, probably won't happen.
Well, I mean, it should do if this is becoming statutory and it's a foundation subject. But you're right, reality and expectation. Right. So we alluded to this in the last video as one of the key takeaways, but they have made it quite clear that they will be replacing the current GCSE in computer science. It is seen as too narrow and specialised. So we're going to be having a broader, more balanced GCSE in computer science that covers, you know, the entire area, the entire scope of the program of study for computing. So that was one big thing. Replace the computer science GCSE with GCSE computing, including computer science, IT, and digital literacy and real world applications. So, I mean, as I just mentioned as well, girls are still very underperforming. And of course, this fact that students score lower in computer science and other subjects by almost a whole grade. And of course, that was finally acknowledged after a lot of push from Ofqual that no, it is just being graded too harshly, and they have started to make minor adjustments. But that's a big one. The GCSE in computer science will be going in place with a broader one. And you can see the DfE response on the right, they will be following that advice and doing that. So, yeah, that's a big impact. That's split the world down the middle in the computer science forums, hasn't it, Dave?
It's definitely split the world down the middle. That's right, because you've got those people that campaigned really hard for computer science, and you know, they love the technical aspects of the subject. And then you've got the other half that were like, no, we were never supposed to get rid of applications and digital literacy, and you know, we're turning off a lot of learners, and especially we're teaching technologies that are 40, 50 years old at this point, when you think about, you know, the von Neumann architecture, for example.
Yeah.
And they're just saying, what's the relevance of any of this? You know, why do we need to know how to add 2 binary numbers together? I mean, ALUs don't even work like this anymore. So why are we even bothering? So it's definitely split the world down the middle. I mean, I'll be sad to see some of that stuff go, Craig. I'm not going to lie, because it's what I know and love. I've been teaching it for so long, and it's what my degree was in. And, you know, I actually love some of these technical bits, even though they're really, really out of date. So So it'd be nice to see some more technical bits come in that maybe are a little bit more up to date. But I suspect it won't happen because we've already got a problem trying to
Yeah.
recruit teachers that can teach the basics of
Mm.
computer science, never mind some of these more advanced concepts. So I
Yeah.
suspect we're going to get rid of a lot of the stuff that we know and love, and it'll be replaced by some broader IT and AI based stuff.
Yeah. Worth noting, though, we said this in the last video, but if you're just coming in for this one, if you're there throwing your hands up going, oh, we're no longer going to teach programming and algorithms, if you look on the right there, although they've said we will replace computer science GCSE with a GCSE in computing that better reflects this broad approach, we will continue to uphold the core principles of computer science. And they specify, such as programming and algorithms. Now, that's as far as it goes. They didn't mention anything else, but in the DfE response, they went to the effort to say, no, computer science is a clear part of this broad and balanced computing GCSE, and it will still include programming and algorithms. So it's not quite as bad as some naysayers are making out, but we don't know anything more than that at the moment. They have acknowledged very seriously that our subject no longer sits on its own. They've made it quite clear that almost no subject sits on its own. We'll get into that. This is going to be one of the most holistic program studies we've seen so far, that subjects bleed into each other, and no more so than computing, because obviously we're based on technologies. Computing skills enrich almost every other subject, and they pulled out a few there. So they are going to be making sure that the new curriculum has coherence and alignment across it, and that there'll be references to computing in all the other subjects, and that we'll be required to teach certain skills so that they can then be embedded and applied in other subjects. So what the DfE says here is the revised program of studies will prioritise core concepts in each subject, so not just computer science, and make sure they're coherent within and across subjects. So that has big implications for us as computer scientists, but it's not just us. We won't go into it, but for example, they're introducing, financial education, mortgage rates and stuff like that, and credit scores. They're saying the idea of percentages will be taught in maths early, so that it's explicitly cross-referenced. And then when we talk about mortgage rates and budget planning and citizenship, they have that skill. That's going to happen across the curriculum, but definitely impacts us there, Dave.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how much of an impact that is for us as a subject facilitating other subjects.
Yeah.
So, for example, I'm going to just pick out 3D modeling in DT here.
Yeah.
Does that mean that we can anticipate doing a bit of Google SketchUp or something like that at Key Stage 3, so that DT don't need to teach the basics of the software? We don't really know. That might be how IT starts to kind of re-manifest itself into our curriculum. I'm just guessing, but it feels like that could happen.
It's an interesting second point there on the DfE response, incidentally. They're not just paying lip service to this. They've said, no, things are so holistic. All these skills cross over. The departments can't sit on their own. This will be the first program of study that is not available online as a set of PDFs. It will be an interactive, machine-readable national curriculum. And they've said it will visually represent the links within and between subjects. So it's going to be much more interactive, because, they realise we need to make this explicit. We need to make it easy for people to see where these things happen across the school. So interesting.
Yeah, thinking about geography again for a minute, maybe at Key Stage 3 in computing, we might look at things like Google Earth and, Google Maps and things like that.
Yeah.
And maybe you can see a little unit of work where a student has to use Google Maps to get from A to B, and they have to maybe use Google Earth to identify X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, I'm speculating, but you can see how a lot of people are upset that applications are coming back into computing in a bigger way, but it might not be PowerPoint presentations. It could be something much more modern than that. I think for certain, and I know a lot of schools haven't got rid of what I would call desktop publishing, but it's now called graphic design, really, and using applications like Canva and things like that.
Yeah,
Although it's also worth saying, Craig, that they've been quite explicit in the assessment
they
review
have.
to say they're not going to name specific software or applications because the pace of technology changes so quickly
Yeah,
that they're not going to refer to them like that. So it'll be interesting. It'll be open to a bit of interpretation, I suspect.
it will indeed. So, right, well, we couldn't get away from this. The next section of the report is about what they have to say about digital literacy and AI. And the reason this is out of our computing specific section is this was across the CAR report and the DFE response. They had dedicated entire sections to it. No surprise that digital literacy would be across everywhere, and no surprise that AI would be across everywhere. Now, we'll focus on the implications it has for computer science and what sits in ours. But it's important to realize in this report that these were dedicated sections dedicated across the entire review from 1 to 5 in all subjects. So, digital literacy, they've come out and said it is a national priority. Some interesting stats there, which are quite damning to read, but a big vacancy there in the skill shortage around these, and the assumption that young people just pick it up or just pick up the right stuff is incorrect. So what they've said is the curriculum must offer robust, explicit digital education across all key stages. And there's quite a bit here in the DFE, which I thought was worth mentioning. But the two bits in bold: delivering the computing recommendations will provide more pupils with valuable digital skills, and we will include a requirement for the relevant digital content in those subjects, programs of studies, and will ensure that it aligns with the computing curriculum. This comes to this cross-teaching aspect. We're still going to be the home for this stuff, but we'll be teaching certain core skills, and other subjects will expect us to have taught it. So it's going to be an interesting balance there, Dave, isn't it? What do you think about the whole digital literacy side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, this notion that our young people are digital natives, I mean, it's just a
Mm,
myth. I mean, you only need to watch a student trying to save and load a file, and they haven't got a clue where it's going, how to bring it back, or anything like that. And in many ways, I know a lot of teachers have felt it's been a bit of a step backwards. Um, and we need to kind of remember that there are some basic skills. I mean, watching some
mm,
students use a mouse when all they've had through their primary experience is working on tablets, we've kind of lost some of these real basic skills. So it's going to be interesting to see how that manifests itself. And then, yeah, with
mm.
digital literacy, thinking about sort of e-safety, cybersecurity, protecting yourself online, digital footprints, all those things that we're really
Yeah.
familiar with already is kind of being, reframed into this idea of digital literacy. But of course, then they're putting new things in like, fake news and,
Yes.
manipulating society through algorithms and things like that. So, going to be really interesting to see how the space develops for sure. I noticed, by the way, Craig, we're inadvertently
Mm.
and interchangeably using the words computing and computer science. I mean, let's be
Ah,
really clear here.
yeah.
Okay, computer science is gone. Okay, so whenever we say computer science, that's an error on our part. It's computing, both at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 and GCSE
Yeah.
computing. So
Which will contain elements of computer science and
elements
digital literacy
of,
and IC. But yes,
yeah,
that's absolutely correct. Yes,
yeah,
totally. Yes. So interesting, because digital literacy is definitely not a new term and we've been talking about it for ages, but it's the first time the government have explicitly kind of stated what it actually means to them. So we pulled that out. So a couple of bits there. The government are defining it as it encompasses the knowledge, behaviors, and confidence required to use technologies and computer systems creative, safely, and effectively, and the ability to make well-informed, critical judgments about implications, risk, and impact of how digital technology is used. So, yes, two very woolly, all-encompassing
I was going to
statements,
say,
but at
still
least
feels
we
quite slippery to me.
I know, but at least they've actually defined what they think digital literacy is. Now, on to the big one, AI in the curriculum.
Mm,
So they've quite clearly said AI literacy, they're calling it, is essential. So understanding it, using it, questioning it. And the curriculum lacks AI coverage. So they want students to not only understand how AI works, but limitations, ethical implications. And they have recommended, the CAR recommended, to embed AI into computing and to update it regularly. And we'll talk about how those updates will look and manifest a bit later on. And what the DFE said about that? Well, they've basically turned around and said AI literacy is important. It will sit with us, but it will be everywhere across the curriculum. So, it's something that it is there. And what is not a surprise, really, Dave, is it? We knew this would be the case. The refreshed curriculum will teach pupils AI literacy and how to solve problems. So we are still going to sit with AI as a primary subject, but it's definitely not just our remit. I think that's the big one there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we already know that the
Yeah.
vast majority of students are using AI outside of school, not least to help them with their homework and things like that. Everyone knows this. And
Yeah.
so computing is going to be the home of the technology of AI, how
Yeah.
AI actually works. And then some of those more social things like the ethical implications and the limits of its capabilities and things like that. So, AI is going to have its home in computing, but it's going to infuse
Yeah.
all the other subjects as well.
Absolutely. So we've got a few other interesting points of note. And again, this is the lens of computer science teachers. So one was what they're calling media literacy. Now, I've not heard that term before. It made perfect sense when they said it. But this is defined as critical engagement with media messaging, including AI generated content. So we're talking here about all the bots out there, fake news, conspiracy theories, biased messaging. Over half of students report encountering conspiracy beliefs in class or online. The importance to fact check. Now, they have recommended the CAR that the strengthening of media literacy in English, it needs to happen in English and citizenship. So, looking at emotive language, biased language, fact checking. Now, I've got a little note here from I wrote a little note on the right hand side. The report is recommend, and there was no DFE response to this, by the way, Dave, which is why I've got a note there. So, although the report is highlighting that this needs to be happening more in English and citizenship, I think there's a clear overlap of computing. We have been. How long have you been teaching where you've been talking about fact checking and bias and sources and citations? We've been doing that for ages. It's now just presenting itself in a more modern form, fake news, bots, the amplification of social media. So I still think there's a very clear part here. In fact, we've just been drafting a unit on sort of fake news and implications, what it means. So I don't have anything more clear than that, but they're making it clear that this AI and social media, the modern interconnected age, is highlighting this as a problem, and that citizenship in English will need to be strengthened there to cover this. So no mention of computing, but I still think it could possibly have a place. Depends how much time we have.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake putting it in citizenship. If I'm honest, I think this deserves to be in computing curricula because how are these conspiracy theories being spread? How is the misinformation being spread? How are clips of speeches being cut together, missing out the 50 minutes in between to make it look like something was said that wasn't actually said? Well, it happens because of video editing. It happens because of algorithms promoting content depending on the other content that you've watched in the past. And so those skills are very much computing skills. And so I think this does belong in computing. I'm really, really surprised they only put that into citizenship. That feels a bit naive to me.
Well, it was a recommendation that it's strengthened in English and citizenship. I mean, I would like to put this into Key Stage 3, and we have more freedom there. Let's be honest, as CraigNDave, we will develop resources for you at examination that covers the specifications that come out. At Key Stage 3, we'll have more freedom, although we will have to do the benchmark of the new program of study because it's mandatory. But I'd like to think we could still have units in there on this, or why that happened. If the implications are done in media, in English and citizenship, we could talk about why it's happening in the computer side. But we're going to have to see, aren't we? We're going to have to see. Another interesting one, we did actually mention this briefly earlier, financial education. Way, woo, hands up for common sense. They've turned around and said students are heading off to university and leaving and then have no idea what mortgage rates are or how to budget or, what a credit score is. So they've specifically said there'll be financial education. They did say, and not computer science, but I thought it was interesting, this is not going to be the home of maths. We've talked about the cross-curricular, holistic nature of this new program of study. So again, this will sit in citizenship. And the key skills like mortgage rates, interest will be taught in maths, but the actual financial education will be taught in citizenship. So I just thought it was an interesting takeaway. And again, the reason I brought it up is a note here. Will we still be teaching spreadsheets? I don't know. I mean, it's important and IT is definitely going to be in there and it's balanced, but I could see this being an interesting way. We've been teaching spreadsheets for years. They're useful. We're teaching data science and data analysis. It's useful to teach some kind of analysis tool, whether that, be Microsoft Excel or any other form of spreadsheet. Well, if this is coming in, this could be a great way of applying those skills. We could teach spreadsheets possibly, but with a lens of budgeting. Now it makes sense because they're covering it over here and they're learning mortgage rates over there. But again, who knows, Dave? I'm just, spitballing here. What it means and how it will all land, I don't know. Any thoughts?
Well, it requires a lot of coordination. And of course, that's what the new curriculum is supposed to do. It's supposed to create these cross-curricular links that are much more enriched than they are at the moment. So who knows? I mean, you're right. I mean, I think actually what they said was calculating a percentage belongs in maths,
yes,
but then
using
right. percentages for interest rates, mortgage rates, that kind of thing, then belongs in citizenship. So I don't think they're teaching interest rates in maths. But
no, I think you're right. Yeah.
Similarly for computing, I mean, spreadsheets, right? Are they in? Are they out? I mean, they were supposed to be out in the 2014 review because, Gove said, "Who wants to teach spreadsheets? They're boring." Now that isn't the quote, right? That's misinformation right there. But it went along the lines of that. Spreadsheets are boring, which is why we should teach coding. And I think, in computing, we've thought, well, spreadsheets aren't that boring because they require all those computational thinking skills that are associated with programming. And they do include functions and formulae and things that are akin to programming. And cells essentially are variables. So I think as computing teachers, we've often thought, well, we kind of really need spreadsheets, so perhaps they were sort of misinterpreted. It'd be interesting to see what happens, but certainly, I mean, they're talking about data science, right? And they're talking about the possibility of an A level in data science and AI. Then doesn't it make sense to use application software that enables you to do data science lower down the school?
That's it. We will see. And all this comes down to, as we've said lots of times, and this is just a nice, interesting takeaway. We've said it multiple times. This is a much more holistic program of study. There are going to be links between subjects, across key stages, digital literacy, media literacy, AI everywhere. So this new national curriculum will be an active, navigatable online product. That's essentially what this slide is saying. It's not going to be a bunch of static PDFs. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like when it comes out. But hopefully it will help us manage this new, higher cross-curricular way. So what does this all mean for you then? I mean, as schools, before we get onto our last slide, which is the timeline, prepare for computing curriculum reform. We've got GCSE changes coming up. And we've got some times for that. Review your Key Stage 4 provision. It's going to become statutory. Will you be offering the computing program of study to all, even if they don't take a GCSE? It's statutory. It's a foundation subject. What will that look like? Only 10% of the schools are doing that at the moment. They're saying that's not sufficient. We will be strengthening digital literacy and media literacy across subjects, and obviously we'll be involved in that in some part. And a key thing is they're not saying, there it is, off you go. This entire next year, 2026, is going to be a year-long period of consultation about how this stuff happens. So when Dave and I have thrown out, well, I wonder how this will happen and what's the reality there and how's that going to land? What they've said is, well, here's a huge report and here's a huge government response, but we really need to consult now about how we make this a reality. And that's what 2026 is about. So if you're keen and
Yeah.
eager and have opinions, look out for that. Go on, Dave.
Yeah, can I just jump in there a minute? Because I think it's interesting the way you said they're not going to say, here's the curriculum review, off you go. I think they are, actually. I think I
Right.
disagree with
Okay.
you. I,
All
th- I
right.
think they are essentially not going to change the foundation of the Department for Education's response. This is what it is. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of discussion now going on, and we see it with computing at school groups. We see it on the Facebook groups. We see, lots of sort of think tanks all kind of having discussions about the curriculum assessment review and the government response. Almost with the idea that they might be able to influence some kind of change in thinking. That will not happen.
Yeah.
There is no point in discussing all that stuff. Okay. It will be decided what's going in and coming out. So I think when they say consultation opportunities, I think personally, and I think this because of all the evidence that's happened with previous reforms,
Yeah.
what will happen is the consultation is more about how do we make this happen as
Yeah, that's
opposed
exactly
to
exactly
do
it.
we want to change some of these things. And it'll come down to
Yeah.
somebody at some point is going to have to make the decision in GCSE computing, what are we taking out so that we can put
Yeah.
two-thirds in?
Yeah. So apologies if I misled you. That is exactly correct. No, the car is done. You're right. What I meant to say was exactly what you've just clarified. This is a year of consultation from the DFE saying, this is what they said. This is what we said we're going to do. How do we do it? The nuts and bolts, as you say, what comes in, what goes out. What is cross-linked? What has to be taught there if that's been expected there? There's a lot to do.
Yeah.
I mean, final point there on that bullet point, challenges. No recommendation for what is removed from the national curriculum. And you just alluded to that. And I guess this is it, especially for us, if we're
Yeah.
going from a GCSE in computer science to GCSE in computing,
Yeah.
well, a bunch has to come out. What does that look like? Not there yet. We don't know that. That's not in the report or the response in any detail. So
My fear is that there's just going to be an awful lot of discussion, as I've said, on our groups in the computing of people, just moaning about what they don't like, what they don't want to see, how
yeah,
terrible this all is. And there's no point. There is
you just
no
got to get on
point
board.
in going
Yeah,
down those roads. So I'm sure over the next 12 months, Craig, we're going to be invited to loads of meetings where the agenda item is going to be discussion of the curriculum and assessment review. Don't bother, is my advice. It's already decided. There is no point you saying, oh, I think we want this in the GCSE, or, oh, I think we need an alternative GCSE that covers this. You're wasting your time, okay?
yeah,
Really, it should be about how are we going to implement this as opposed
yeah.
to what we wish it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And an interesting one, they have stated about what future curriculum reviews will look like. Now, this is interesting because they say holistic reviews every 10 years, but I mean, governments barely last 10 years before they change and then things go up. But what they've said is, on average, there should be a major holistic review of the entire curriculum about once a decade, which is how long it's been since the last one. But they have made it clear that that is not good enough for the faster evolving areas of the curriculum. So they've said there will need to be light touch updates for fast evolving areas. So, and they even heighten the DFE response, it's right there, especially in subjects which may require more frequent changes, such as computing. And the aim here is to keep curriculum content coherent, relevant, deliverable. So that'll be interesting. Major reviews every 10 years, new program of study if this is followed, but some kind of light touch approach so we can we can update and modernize. And we will be the biggest subject hit by that. So what that ends up looking like, not sure. Interesting though. But Dave, the big one I want you to do is whiz through that with our audience. So there's a nice screenshot. There is the timeline. You've got,
The
yeah.
timeline. Yes, absolutely.
And we haven't made
Um,
any of these dates up. This is a timeline that come out of the curriculum review and the official DFE response. It's all in there. We've just pulled it all together across both documents
yeah.
and put it in here for you.
Yeah, this is factual. We are not making this up. There's no speculation in here. This is exactly what is going to happen. And interestingly, somebody said to me yesterday, yeah, but how do you think a change in government might affect this? So if we think about it, we're going to have an election in 2029, and this timeline spans out all the way to 2034. We may have a new government by then. What's going to happen? Well, I think it's interesting that the current government have done the curriculum review and their response to it and some consultation. Their intention is to get a program of study out here before the next election. I mean, that's quite obvious.
Yeah.
And if that happens, it doesn't matter which government come in of any colour. They are not going to be able to then change this again overnight, because the education system will just, cry. They won't have it. They just will not have it. So this is going to happen. A change in government is not going to change this. I mean, you might get to, 2024, as Craig said, because they're going to look at this every 10 years. And let's say that we've got a different government at that point. They may well then take the opportunity to say, okay, now it's time for another review at that point. But I cannot see any world in which a new government would change this the moment that it's already been implemented. That doesn't make sense. Now, if the current government slip their timeline and it ends up slipping the implementation, this slips past the next election, then I think all bets are off, because until you actually implement something, there is still an opportunity to say we're not going to do it. So that could happen, but only if the current government slip their timetable. So let's see what happens. So let's whiz through this then. So here we are in 2025. The CAR report and the government response has been published. That's what we're talking about. 2026 is going to be a consultation on what we can remove and how this gets actually implemented. And they're going to publish changes to Progress 8 and Attainment 8. And we'll talk about that in a future episode. By 2027, we're going to have the new National Curriculum Programmes of Study, Key Stage 1 to 4, released in the spring. So they give teachers plenty of time to then be implementing that for first teaching of the new National Curriculum September 2028. Of course, there is an interesting situation there in terms of the subject choices that students are going to have to take for their options, because they're going to have to choose the new GCSE subjects in 2027. And so, things are going to have to be a little bit more settled with the GCSEs, even though they won't have implemented the new GCSEs by that point. So that'll be interesting. But I think the key milestone for you as a computing teacher is you will be delivering this new national curriculum from September 2028. Yeah. So you've got between now and then to get schemes of learning all aligned with the new national curriculum. And we're not going to know exactly what it looks like until spring of 2027. Anyway, 2029 is the first phase of the new GCSEs. And then in 2030, we get phase 2 of the new GCSEs. Now, this is where we will get some misinformation being spread. We do not know, because the DFE have not said whether computing is in phase 1 or in phase 2. So if it's in phase 1, then new GCSEs will start to be taught in September of 2029. But if we find ourselves in phase 2, then the new GCSE computing will be for first teaching in September of 2030. So we're going to wait and see. Traditionally, we've been in the first phase of things. So I would probably anticipate being in the first phase of things, not least because they've said that the current GCSE computing is out of date and needs reform. So I'd be very surprised if they leave that to second phase. but I do not work inside the Department for Education. And I suspect they don't know themselves either yet. It'll depend what comes out of the consultation, I suspect. So we'll see. So looking ahead to 2031, which feels like a long way away from here, but it's going to come around really quickly. We're looking at the first teaching of Phase 1 A-levels from September 2031. And that's going to also be the first exams of those new Phase 1 GCSEs in the same year. And then in 2032, we've got first teaching of Phase 2 A-levels and the first exams of the new Phase 2 GCSEs. Again, is A-level computer science, is it even going to be called A-level computer science? We don't know. Is it going to be in Phase 1? Is it going to be in Phase 2? We don't know. Is there going to be a new either A-level or T-level in data science and AI? We don't know. We have no idea what that's going to look like. I mean, it's feasible. I don't see it happening, but it's feasible that there is no A-level in computer science, and it is just either a T-level. Who knows? We don't actually know. I'd be really surprised if that happens, but we don't know for sure that A-level computer science is going to stay. 2033 will be the first exams of the Phase 1 A-levels, and 2034 brings us to Phase 2 of the first exams for the new A-levels. And that is your next 10 years mapped out.
Oh, blimey. Wow. It's been one of our longer videos, but I hope you generally find these useful. So we have one more in the series coming up, which isn't computer science related at all, but it covers what we've talked about a couple of times in this video, which is the new proposed model for Progress 8 and Attainment 8. So that's a really interesting one. They've actually published a separate paper along with their government response, which is their new proposed model. And of course, that is performance measures. And we know that so much of subject choice at Key Stage 4 is driven by whether you've taken a combination of subjects, which will count the performance measures. It's just the situation we are in, and we understand why. So we're going to pull that apart, look at it, and also look at the implications, what it means for computing as a GCSE and how likely is it will be offered or won't be offered. There's some interesting nuances in there. So that's going to be part 3. But for now, thank you very much, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.